Hi, good evening, everyone, and Ramadan Kareem. Welcome to the Misk Academy 1-hour talk. My name is Christiane Mueck, and I'm a leadership consultant with Misk Academy, and I'll be your host for this hour. Our topic today is learning to lead online. And when we were talking about this in preparing this call, this is obviously not a new topic. We've all been working online for the last few years with colleagues in different geographies, when traveling, and just out of business necessity. However, during the current crisis with COVID-19, we don't have the choice anymore. As leaders and as team members, we have to adapt to the new reality of sitting at home and spending our days on video conferences with our colleagues in other places. And obviously this presents some challenges for leaders and team members alike. So today we want to focus on how leaders need to adapt to this new situation. So what particular challenges they face, how they can adapt and respond to the situation, and how they can turn this into a learning opportunity for themselves and for their teams. Before we start, a few technical details. This is a moderated call, which means that you can ask questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And also there will be a quick poll later in the discussion. So when that comes up on your screen, just choose the option that you agree most with. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome our two panelists for the evening. They are both experts in the field of leadership, and they are especially experts in the topic of leading online. I welcome Jean Leslie, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Creative Leadership in the US, and Vicky Marsh, who is an associate partner with Ernst & Young in London. Hi, both of you. I hope that everyone can see you now.
Hi.
Hello.
Good evening.
So Jean and Vicky, it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight. I would like to ask you to introduce yourselves first to our listeners.
So I'm Jean Leslie. I have been in the area of leadership and leadership development for over 31 years. When I first started this work, I started in the area of research and then moved into training, and then moved back into research. And today I am doing work in operations to make sure that the research that we do makes its way into our programs.
Thank you, Jean.
Great, and my name is Vicky Marsh. I'm delighted to be with you this evening. I have been with EY for over 30 years, so between Jean and I, you have a fair bit of experience there. And in that time, I've worked with senior leadership teams to drive strategic change, both within EY, but also with our clients. A lot of that time has been in the M&A transactions and business restructuring field. More recently, I'm focused on the people aspects of change with a real passion around leadership and teaming to drive successful change. And I currently sit in a part of EY that we call people consulting. So we effectively work with business to support all the people aspects of transformation and change, thinking about whether people have got the right people strategy or talent strategy to align with where they want to go as a business. Do they have the right environment to attract, retain, and develop the right people? Do they have the right leadership in place? Do we have the right people with the right skills to get where the business wants to go? And I guess, as you can imagine, this conversation kind of takes a new lens with the fact that we have accelerated, as Christiane was mentioning, in the enforced virtual environment we're now in. So really interesting times for us now, I think.
I can imagine. And seeing that I am discovering new functionalities of Zoom nearly every day, it is a steep learning curve for everyone, for sure. Maybe I'll start with asking you both a quite simple question and see what your perspective is on that. And that question would be, what's most important for leaders during the current crisis? So, I mean, even experienced leaders seem to struggle with what's happening right now. Why is this special, and what's most important to do?
Well, so I'll start if that's okay. I mean, I think right now, I mean, leading through change in any event is different to leading in status quo, and I think that needs some different skills. If you add doing this remotely, virtually, online as opposed to face to face, and in a time of sort of enforced crisis where there's so many unknowns, that just adds another dimension. So I think that what's really important is leaders are under huge pressure, and I know even from my own business and from clients that we talk to, that even strong, experienced leaders are sitting back and thinking, "Oh my goodness, how do I do this?" So I don't think we should underestimate how difficult it is. And I think there is a need, and maybe we talk about this a bit more as we go through the hour, but I think there's a need for leaders to be resilient, because this is very tough. I think there's a need for them to be innovative and think of new ways of doing things. I think they need to be open to new ideas and perspectives and try things they haven't tried before. And I think above all, they need to be very connected with their workforce, because bringing their teams along with them is going to be critical. So I think it's a real challenge for leaders, is what I would say.
Yeah. And as you're saying, even the most experienced leaders are experiencing new challenges on a daily basis. So it's
That's right.
It's an unusual situation for people who might be at the top of the corporate hierarchy.
I agree.
Yeah.
So
Jean, same question to you.
Yes, I agree with what Vicky has said, and I'm going to add something else that's perhaps little known, and that's polarity thinking. So polarity thinking is both a mindset and a skill set, where you recognize and hold two opposing ideas, values, it could be strategy or competencies in mind, and get the best of both. So we've done some research recently and have looked at the polarities that leaders say that they really need to survive the post-COVID war. And so I kind of want to walk you through those. One, leaders need to act quickly and they need to slow down. So they need to act quickly, evaluate the current situation, and take immediate action. At the same time, they really need to think about their organization. What was the organization set up to do? What's their intended purpose? And think about whether or not they'll be able to do that post the COVID world. Leaders also need to display empathy and tough love. So they need to display compassion, to acknowledge the unknown that we're all going through right now, address fears of unemployment, salary benefit losses, illness, and at the same time, they need to set clear expectations and enforce the new ways that we'll engage. Leaders need to cut money and they need to spend money. So all discretionary spending now is probably stopped. Non-urgent expenses are cut. And at the same time, they have to invest in the technology that's needed to do this online work. And where I work, we're issued laptops. So it was not a very difficult transition, but for many organizations, this was a digital transformation magnified. So cut money and yet spend money. Be task and relationship focused. So for many people, if this is the first time you've led online, you want to get down to business, you want to use that technology right now to get problems solved, to set direction, and at the same time, you have to build and establish relationships. And then finally, verify and trust. So leaders now need to trust that the work will be done in quality, and these are workers that are now at home. They're out of sight, out of mind, and yet they must verify that work and trust that work at home employees are doing what they said that they would do.
Very interesting, very interesting. And if I understand this concept of polarities right, these are seeming opposites that somehow in the person of the leader need to come together and make sense for the people they lead, but also for the leaders themselves.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think the dichotomy, so the bit where for me leaders have to understand, everybody reacts to this changing work environment that's been accelerated, and we may have been wanting to go there at some point, but has been forcibly accelerated on us. Everyone reacts very, very differently. Yeah. And people are in different situations. So somebody's forced to work at home in a very, very small house with children that can't go to school and all of the pressures that brings. Other people, in a big house with a garden and feel completely differently about the experience. But for leaders, trying to empathize and understand their workforce's issues, which will not be the same from person to person, as well as driving some of that the toughness and the resilience that's required to manage the business, balancing those two polarities, if you like, is really hard.
Yeah, and I believe it does change the relationships at all levels that leaders have built, their way of working, but also their way of interacting with everyone around them.
Yeah.
Yes, the use of virtual teams and virtual teaming has really inclined over the years with globalization and advances in technology. But we've never experienced anything like this, right? Where there are people that are home that are both child care, they're teachers.
Yeah.
I've seen cats walk across keyboards in meetings. I've heard children fighting in the kitchen during conference calls. So this is a very different time in which we are working, and for the most part really trying to save our organizations and rebuild back our economy.
Yeah. So one comment I've heard a lot, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, is it's not really, for a lot of people, it's not really that they have been asked to do something completely new, but it is the circumstances around them that have changed. And that includes family living situations, childcare, distancing or physical proximity to people that you don't usually spend your whole day with. What's your view on that? What is actually the thing that is very different from the previous situations? Either of you?
Yeah. I think, well, all of those things you've mentioned are different, and they all add up to create something that really is something that most people haven't experienced before. So if you're I think if you're a leader and you're trying to, suddenly you've got a situation where you're trying to manage, lead the business perspective piece, and you may have a business that has is doing well because it's in supermarkets or something that's essential, and so your business is working well, and you've got to manage that piece. You may have a business which is not, has really not gone well at all, and having to manage, putting people on furlough or even redundancy or managing those kind of things from a business perspective, and thinking about the short-term piece, as well as thinking about how you might get out the other side of all of this. And then there's the people perspective, where although we've been doing some of these things before, working remotely, we've all been in a meeting where there's somebody on a video conference and somebody on a phone, and all that's fine.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
suddenly it's been accelerated to something completely different, and we've got, as Jean was saying, everybody's on video. We're all on video all day, which is actually quite hard as well. And then you've got, the cat or the dog or the child or whatever it is, which is, and making that, for leaders, making that be all right is also another difference. Because I think, having a baby crying in the background on a call, or a dog, or your husband bringing you a cup of tea or whatever, would not normally have been kind of, you don't really do that. Now it's all fine. And I think leaders have to have a different perspective on what's okay and how to engage their workforce in a way that takes account of where the workforce is.
Yeah.
And each of their workforce, you're on a call with 20 people, each of those people is reacting differently. I'm not sure I've quite answered the question, actually, but there's some of the thoughts that are going through my mind.
So I think the people that have been doing this for a while now have an advantage, and we should probably listen to what they have to say about what works well and what doesn't. But for those of us who have been kind of cast into this situation full time, this is the way that we live now. This is our new normal. We've had very little training. I mean, a lot of organizations don't train team leaders, virtual team leaders, or team members how to do the work. That oftentimes they assume, well, you just pick up the phone or you use Zoom and you have a meeting. But there are different technologies that work better under different circumstances. There are ways to use technology so that people feel less virtual.
Yeah.
And the relationship building is different. So there are many differences from working co-located that just aren't fully understood nor fully discussed and people trained on how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And to be honest, it didn't used to be something that you would necessarily train people on. It's become just something, a new skill set that needs to be acquired now very, very rapidly by a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of made an assumption that it's actually, and maybe that's reflecting our own experience, that it's actually more difficult to lead online in the way that we're doing it now. And I would like to launch our quick poll now with the participants, with the listeners online, to just see. We have a poll which basically asks, where is it more difficult to lead? Is it online? Is it offline? Or is it basically the same? So please, for everyone on the line, try to vote in the next 30 seconds or so. Okay, survey is over. We don't see, we see the results now. Okay, interesting. Not as polarized as I thought. You see the results too, right? So we have 54% say it's more difficult to lead online, so a little bit more than half. 20% say it's more difficult to lead offline. And a quarter, 25%, say it's the same. And personally, I have to say I'm a bit surprised, and and that might be a reflection of the current situation, because the new normal, the leading online, for me feels harder, and it feels like it requires more effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm surprised too, and I think for Maybe for people who are very technologically savvy, perhaps people who are in the younger generation than myself, find use the technology very effectively, and find the remote connectivity works for them. I think my experience would say that even across the different demographics, people seem to be finding this, what we're in now, certainly from a UK perspective, people are finding that hard across the board in different ways. I mean, some people are obviously dealing with it better than others, but the poll doesn't feel to me quite how it feels on the ground, in my experience, is what I would say.
I tend to agree. One of the benefits of virtual work is productivity. And I must say that having now worked, let's see, over 40 days virtually, I agree with them. And I can't always say that I'm real happy about that necessarily, because what happens is I go from one side of the house to the other. And so there is no face-to-face interaction. There's no hallway conversations. There's no interaction where you would just relationship build. It's just straight work. Straight work. And so I've had to really think about, going out and taking a walk, spending time breathing, going outside to get fresh air, walking away. So during this time, setting boundaries is extremely important and not necessarily the easiest thing to do.
No.
And for those of us who are working in global organizations where you have so many different time zones, that compounds the factor even more. Boundary spanning in this time, not boundary spanning, but setting boundaries has been initially difficult.
Yeah. And I think even in my organization, but also in clients that we speak to, there has to be quite a deliberate action by leaders to help people set boundaries, to say, actually, it's okay if you are not at your computer or your laptop for an hour because you've gone for a walk. It's okay that you go and cook dinner. It's okay, especially as you say, Jean, when you're working globally, your days can be 16, 18 hours long if you're not careful. And there's certainly the feedback that we've had is that people feel like they need to be present. And actually the productivity point is absolutely right. But the days feel longer, and actually without putting in breaks and feeling leadership, allowing teams to feel like that's okay, without doing that, people really struggle with the non-stop. Because if you think about when you're in an office, you might have meetings all day, but some of them you're having it with a cup of coffee with somebody, or you're walking to another room to have a chat, or you're even commuting. So you get this kind of, it's great, I've got extra time because I don't have to commute, but then you feel like you have to spend that time looking at your video. So setting those boundaries, the leaders setting those boundaries, and
I'm just flipping through some of the questions that we got from our participants, and there's quite a few questions around the topic of work-life balance, boundaries, and setting positive standards as a leader. So many people don't work in the classic 9 to 5 anymore, but let's say there's at least an understood start and end of your workday. And that simply doesn't happen anymore.
It is an important part of the leader's role to set expectations. So what's the expectation around when you're supposed to respond to email? If you don't answer right away because you can't see the person, is that okay if it's the next day? Is it a matter of hours? Can you alter the meeting schedule so somebody's up early, someone's up late, so it's not the same pattern? Now, you're right, those kind of norms and expectations really need to be set by the team. so that it's clear. Otherwise, the likelihood of burnout is high. And it's not every person needs to be on every single team. So it's really important to pay attention to, who needs to be core, who's core to that, and who can be peripheral.
Yeah. And that's a very important triage function of the leader, to really make sure that you don't spend 12 hours a day in front of your laptop, but maybe only 6 hours.
Yeah. And I think the leaders setting the role modeling of a leader, as well as managing that balance,
right.
The role modeling of a leader to, be at the meeting in their, hooded sweatshirt and have to go off and make a cup of coffee, or be open about one of the leaders at EY today. I was actually on a large conference call, and the leader said, I am finding this really, really hard, and I took a day off, and I felt much better for doing that. And so there's a little bit of vulnerability. Showing vulnerability is not weakness. It's showing empathy and understanding with everybody that you're talking to, and that's powerful. I mean, I think people assume that leaders are invincible and they have to be a certain way, and actually just coming and meeting your workforce where they are, and empathizing can create a huge positive.
Yeah. Are there so let's say vulnerability and empathy and positive mindsets are not topics that are really new to leadership. I think over the last few years they've made a huge impact, and they're a big part of how people choose deliberately how to lead. How does that benefit the leaders now and their teams?
Even more now than ever. So there is a growing body of literature that shows that mindfulness does contribute to health, physical health, to psychological health, and to emotional well-being. So meditating, doing yoga, exercise, silent retreats, those are all very beneficial. Exercises, opportunities to take advantage of to reduce stress and to decrease blood pressure, cope with pain. And in this day and age, we started off talking that this is unprecedented, and that many leaders, are working harder and long hours, and they worry about their workforce. Yeah. So now is a great time to, take that idea, that concept, and put it into practice.
And you started off, Jean, talking about these polarities, these opposites that need to come together in the person of the leader, and where obviously there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of frustration maybe on the side of the leader, there's a lot of uncertainty to deal with. And at the same time, there are a lot of decisions to make right now. It's not a time for waiting and seeing, but it's a time for action.
And I think the other thing that leaders need to do in this remote world is particularly in view of the fact that the workforce is kind of feeling their way through how to work like this, and there's a number of uncertainties surrounding us, is to actually drive clarity and communication is critical, because what people need in an uncertain world is something that's very clear. And so you mentioned the word purpose, Jean, earlier. Having clarity of purpose. I mean, EY is a purpose-driven organisation. We believe in building a better working world. We had a session with a number of other CEOs of big organisations that have similar philosophies, and one of the commonalities there is focusing on the purpose and the people and the mindfulness and the well-being as number one. Because if you get that piece right, then that really helps you drive the business. And I think giving people clarity about where the business is going to go, clarity about their own role in that, because I think the other thing is when you're out of the office environment and your interface is a laptop, knowing where you fit and feeling like you have a meaningful contribution to make to where the business is going is really critical. And getting that communication across I think it means you have to do more of different types of communication. And actually some of what's happened, certainly some of what's got into my calendar on a daily basis, is more interactions of the kind that just make sure you're connecting with your team, because otherwise you wouldn't do it at all. So, you know, adding some of that stuff to help with the clarity and the purpose, and people really feeling they're part of that team. And that can have a really galvanizing effect. So it's back to the polarity point, you know, you can be a bit lonely at home on your own, but actually if leaders do this right, you can actually galvanize some togetherness through this.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, working virtually requires a lot of proactivity, right, on the part of the team leader and the team members to stay connected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about diverse teams, people being in very different situations in principle, but also being in different situations and states of mind from one day to another. And obviously, it seems much easier to recognize that when you're walking up and down the corridor in the office and you can pick someone for a cup of coffee. But currently, sometimes people might just disappear for a day or two, and you don't really know what's going on with them. So what are good practices for leaders to really stay connected with the teams, but also to stay connected with the individuals in their teams?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it is hard. You're right. When you see people face to face, it's much easier to have those conversations. I think what I've seen is people making sure that they group people up. So for example, one of the things that we're doing in EY is we have small, what we call pods, groups of people that are sort of 15 or 20 who just get together to just talk about what's going on and how they're feeling and things like that. And it's an opportunity where it's okay to actually say how you feel. And I know a number of clients do that, even things like having an anonymous kind of give it online, give us a word for how you're feeling at the moment, and you get, you know, if you've got a group of 10 or 20 people, you'll get 10 or 20 different words, and you'll realize that even that group is polarized in terms of how they're feeling. And then if you have one-to-one relationships too, so everybody has what's called a buddy. So that's the kind of thing that allows you to make sure that one way or another you're keeping in touch with people and giving the message that it's okay to not be okay or to be okay, and even from one day to the next. But that those individual touch points and making sure people are covered it requires the whole team working together.
Yeah, and I like how you're how the model that you're describing, it doesn't put all the stress and all the burden of taking care of the team only on the leader, but there are structures within the team that partly take care of that as well.
Yeah.
We get a lot of questions here in the question board to setting expectations around working hours, to really drawing a line when it comes to requests at all times of the day. Maybe we can look into that a little bit more, and especially if you're looking at young people or people who are still in let's say situations where they're not so sure about their career and their position in the organization. how can you deal with such a situation without burning yourself out or compromising your own health?
You mean from the employee's perspective as opposed to the leader's perspective?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I would say that is also linked to the leader creating an environment where somebody can say, actually, I've been on my laptop since 8 o'clock this morning, and it's now 6 p.m. and I really need a break. And where that's the case, I think that people can manage that much better. I think that there's an alternative, I guess, would be to say, after a certain time, we're not expecting people to be online. But I think we've already gone beyond all of that, because if you lots of people who send me emails say at the bottom of it, I work flexibly, so if this is out of hours, don't feel like you have to respond. So we already work flexibly, so it's hard to put parameters around time. I do think the best thing that I've seen is for leaders to make it okay for people not, to have to be able to say, actually, I can't do that one, or I can't be late that night.
Yeah.
It does feel very vulnerable to speak up and say that, I need a break, I need to step away. But you can almost bet that other people are feeling the exact same way. And so by setting that and speaking up, it makes a huge difference. And I really appreciate what Vicky was saying earlier about being a role model. This does require a different skill set, a different mindset.
Absolutely.
And so, thinking about what those are and discussing that together as a team can really help to set direction for what those boundaries will be. But rest assured that other people are feeling very much the same way that you are.
Yeah. I think this also goes back to my point about clarity and communication. If people understand the expectations, people know what's expected, they know where they're going, they know what role they have to play, and it's okay to come back and ask questions or say you need some time out or whatever it is, then I think that really helps. And then you are doing that as a team. That can really help. But I guess the other thing that Jean's just sparked off in my mind is about different leadership styles, because a style of leadership that might work face to face, very statesman-like, maybe it has to alter and change when you're dealing virtually. And I've seen a number of leaders, some successfully, some not, adapting their style to work for the more empathetic, different type of communication online. And I guess the other thing that comes to mind is different types of leaders who are perhaps quieter type of leaders, and they may find this more difficult, because sometimes it's more difficult to get a word in. Because you're not, you in a room, you can kind of see how the conversation's going, and you see when people are, when there's a place for you to talk. So that is potentially a challenge. Women leaders, sometimes, we're all women on this panel today as it happens, but some women find it more difficult. Not all. We won't generalize, but maybe. So I think different styles of leadership. I think you have to think about leadership in a different way, whoever you are, whether you're somebody who's a real statesman, or whether you're a slightly more understated leader or whatever. It's just different.
And if I would want to give this a positive spin, Vicky, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of leaders out there who do see the current situation as an opportunity to try something new, to I don't want to say to reinvent themselves, but let's say to definitely broaden the spectrum of how they can lead, to bring out maybe some parts of their personality that would usually not not come out so clearly. Jean, you're nodding vigorously.
Well, I was just thinking that we have not ever resolved the work-life balance issue. And so now is an opportunity to put that on the table and really talk about what that means. So, right, I would look at this as an opportunity to grow, to change, to try new things, develop new skills, and maybe talk about some things that have not been discussable.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is also maybe a need to as you look at your business, both now and as we may come out of this particular scenario, where do we want to go back to, and then where do we want to take the business to? That is also, so it's a thinking about trying different styles, but it's also thinking about different ways of managing your business. And different ways of using the skills of your workforce, different ways you'd like to develop your workforce. So I think the trying new things and the innovation is a big topic, not just for leading now, but thinking about how you lead out of some of this, what the new normal looks like, and what then your business might look like in the future.
I'd like to come back and underscore something that you said, Vicky, earlier, and that is, as we're going through this transition and change, to really codify and communicate what that strategic direction is, where the organization is headed, engage employees in that discussion and decision making, and empower them to move forward, because this can be a very scary time.
How do you do that, though? So we have a few questions also around that. Again, people feel insecure, vulnerable, maybe even threatened in their professional future. Yet you want to get a good performance from them. You want to keep them healthy and engaged. What are good ways of doing that?
So I think the things that I've seen is first of all, honesty and openness from the leader, a frankness about whatever the business situation is, which means that people feel that, which builds trust. Openness builds trust. I mean, there's lots and lots of research about how you build trust and team, and that openness and vulnerability and saying things the way they are is really important. And then the opportunity for people to be part of a discussion about where we go next. So if you want to create a shared vision, one of the important parts of that is people feeling that they have a contribution to make in the discussion. So they've had their say, and then they feel part of whatever is going forward. And I think that is hard to do remotely, but I think engaging people in that conversation, and certainly I've seen over the last few weeks a number of examples, both within and outside of EY, where again, it's more conversation than you would normally have, but to get the workforce understanding why management's doing what management is doing and what leaders are doing, and feeling part of what's happening. And I think, it's hard, but if you get it right, it can be very powerful.
And it links to something that I think you, Vicky, also said earlier, is to err on the side of communicating too much, being too connected, because there's probably always one person that feels less connected than the other.
And you'll also, again, on the other side of that, get, if you ask people, have you got too much or too little communication, you'll always have some who are quite happy with less communication. You're never going to quite get to everybody, but I think the best way is to err on more rather than less, and when you do it in different ways as well. So we've got what we're using now, the Zoom, and there's Microsoft Teams, and you can use whiteboards and forms where you can ask people's opinions, and you can get people to contribute some different things. So using technology in a helpful way can also help to engage people, and people engage in different ways. So if you use a few different mediums, that can also help.
Yeah.
So if there's anything that you gain from this time, learning to live with ambiguity is a huge one and an important one. And you know, to do that, positive self-talk is important. We were talking about taking care of the self earlier. Getting lots of rest, exercise is important. And then at this point in time, really remaining flexible, resilient, agile. I think what are the new things I'm going to learn? What is it that I want to do next? What is going to, you know, really make me happy and engage and charge me going forward? So kind of the balance, I think, between those, taking care of self and being authentic, as you said, communication, resilient, agile, and open to the unknown.
Yeah, and I think that's true for us as individuals, and I completely agree with you, all that well-being and the exercise and the sleeping and everything else. But I think that goes back to the point about leaders role modeling behavior and showing up as authentic leaders. And at a time like this, when there is ambiguity, you're right, we kind of have all got to learn to deal with that. But a leader that can provide some clarity and some trust in the midst of all of that, I think is incredibly powerful and can role model all the things you've just talked about.
Yeah, yeah. And interestingly enough, I mean, these are all attributes of great leaders who also do well in the offline world. This is definitely not something that is only expressed during these times. I have a very nice question here from one of our listeners who asks, do you think that there's a new leadership style that was created during the crisis? And will it last? And I think there's quite a bit of hope in this, that actually something good will come out of this, and we're not all going back to our normal ways and our working in the office when this is over.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think that leaders have all had to stop and think about how they're going to behave. So is there a new style of leader for this crisis? Sort of, yes, because you know, we're all, whatever level of leadership we are, we're all having to think about how we are going to manage our businesses and how we're going to interact with people in a different way, because we have to. So yes, I think it has caused people and is causing people to think and try new things and do some things differently. I personally think that's a positive. And I like to think of, you know, what's the new normal going to look like? How much of what we learn are we going to keep and take into the new world? The engagement with your teams, some of what I've seen in this environment has been really quite special, because people have made more effort and done some different things. So you know, maybe some of that gets taken forward. Some of the new ways of working, some of the acceptance of people who they are, and accepting that people react to things differently. I think that is incredibly positive. So, you know, looking to the new normal when we come out. I heard a professor in one of the business schools that we work with quite a bit talk about two things. One is this short-term window of when we come out of the crisis, how quickly will we go back to doing things the way we used to, even if we don't intend to? Will it slip back? And if it does, that will happen quite quickly, and we'll slip back. Or would we look at the slightly longer window and work out which of the pieces we want to keep that we've learnt, and
Yeah.
which are the bits that actually we prefer the old way. And I think there will be a new normal, because this is such an unexpected time that we're in, affecting the whole world, the whole world economy, all people, from a business, personal well-being, mental health. It's affecting everybody in different ways. So I think there will be, I like to think, a new positive norm.
I suspect leaders will come out of this with two solid, well, potentially solid competencies.
Yeah.
And they're on two ends of a scale. So one of those is confronting personal limitations. So a lot of first-time managers, first-time leaders confront personal limitations. It may be that they are leading peers, they're managing peers, they have issues or concerns of self-doubt, they're having to let go of work that they've been in charge of for years and trust other people to do that. But personal limitations at this point, I'm sure that leaders have encountered things that they thought maybe that they have passed, but have come back, or have come back in new ways.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, and it does sound kind
what
of
would be
like
an example of that?
Communication. I don't know if anyone ever really gets communication nailed down, and it is a constant issue. Strategic thinking is another thing that, I think most people, leaders, battle that, how to do that probably throughout the course of their careers. And the other thing coming out on the other end, which sounds kind of like a paradox, is ensuring readiness amid uncertainty. So if I'm going to be right back in this situation again, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle it? What do I need to remember about this experience that I can apply going forward?
Yeah. And the beauty of this, just listening to you now is really, whenever you talk about leadership and good leaders and their traits, you very quickly get into a territory of soft skills. Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling that a lot of the things that were traditionally described as soft skills are being really instrumentalized now. They're being, it really becomes very clear how this is going to work, how this is working in your organization, how this is working for you as a leader. And it becomes quite operational. It's not soft and fluffy anymore, but it becomes very tangible. And this is also, that's why I like the topic of accountability and so on so much, that your colleagues will hold you accountable to these standards potentially going forward. Mm-hmm. And there's hope in that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there might really be a new leadership style that emerges. Maybe not a global one, maybe definitely not the same one for everyone, but some kind of shift.
Yeah. I think there'll be a shift.
And undoubtedly, paying attention to the human element has got to be elevated now more so than ever before.
Yeah, I agree.
And the fact that over an hour's discussion, we've spent pretty little time talking about the technology part of things, and a lot more on the human and interaction part. I think that's saying something.
I think that technology is an enabler.
Yeah, it's a tool. I agree.
The human is what matters. Absolutely.
Yeah. Very good. Let me quickly look into the Q&A if there are other new questions. Yeah, a few people make the point that there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of investment in your team and your structures and the personalities that you're interacting with right now, and that will pay off no matter what comes after. That's a very nice thought. Yeah. Very good. We're very close to the end of the session, and I want to let everyone go back on time. I would very much like to end our discussion with just a few questions in the form of a lightning round, where you can just answer or complete a sentence with a few words. And I'll ask those to both of you. So for leaders who feel overwhelmed and insecure now, it is important to
increase your resilience.
I said, embrace new habits and ways of connecting with your workforce.
Yeah. Then for leaders who feel disconnected from their teams or from a specific team member working online, I would recommend to
look for new technologies that will enable you to connect and have people feel less virtual.
Give clarity of messages and listen to how people are feeling.
Yeah. Great. More generally, a good online leader is someone who does what?
Pays attention to the team's mindsets, skill sets, how they use technology for what purposes, and trains them, honors boundaries, and is mindful of burnout. And that was more than one word, sorry.
So now we've forgotten. So a good online leader is someone who focuses on their workforce and their work and their purpose.
Yeah. So the big picture and the path into the future. Yeah. And last one. After the crisis is over, I wish we had all learned to
rise above the fear.
Oh, that's a good one.
Very strong.
That's a good one. So mine's nothing like as good as that. I wish we'd learned to be more aware of others than ourselves.
Very good. That's an excellent ending to our session. I'm very happy that we had the opportunity to have you both here, Vicky and Jean. I'm happy that we had the opportunity to talk about leaders' relations with their teams and really the interpersonal aspects a lot more than the technical aspects of leadership.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening. Enjoy the rest of your evening and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.